Folder Podcast. We have opinion.
Hi, everybody!
Hi,
Didn't expect to hear us in English? Well, we too. Our previous podcasts were in Russian, but it's important for us to get feedback from the international community. That's why we welcome you to another Folder podcast. Today, we have prepared an interesting topic for you to discuss from the point of view of person who is into IT and from the point of view of person who is into creativity and art. Andrew, hi. Glad you find time to join us.
it wasn't too difficult. I am glad to join you.
How are you doing?
I am doing well. Hope you and our listeners have it on top of their game too. Today marks our second episode of the Folder podcast. We will discuss the topic of perfectionism. I'm sure you've experienced it in one form or another. Let's dot all the I's and cross all the T's to determine what it is.
I agree. It's a good point to start with. How exactly do you understand what perfectionism is?
One might say that there is nothing to delve into here, claiming that perfectionism is simply the desire to make everything perfect. But what do these words really mean? Let me provide an example. When I plan something, I try to consider absolutely all possible scenarios and outcomes. Another example is when I play games, I can't pass by points of interest on the map. I must explore every nook and cranny of the entire location so that I don't miss out even the least impressive piece of loot or minor character. As a result, I start treating the game as a must-do job, and instead of relaxation and entertainment, I begin to feel tired, get anxious, and lose interest in the game itself. Eventually, it gets shelved. So, what does science say about this?
Your explanation is relevant. We can look at perfectionism from both philosophical and psychological perspectives. From a philosophical perspective, perfectionism is the desire of perfection, which can be directed toward different aspects of life, such as work, relationships, learning, or creativity. In terms of psychological point, perfectionism is seen as a personality trait. Perfectionists are people who set very high standards for themselves and strive to achieve them. They often feel anxious and insecure when they fail to achieve their goals. Can you still call yourself a perfectionist now? Then you have heard these definitions.
Well, yes. As I've given examples from my own life, I am definitely in the perfectionist club.
I think that to some level, every one of us from time to time shows traits of perfectionism, especially when doing something that is important to them. Some might say that perfectionism is a good thing, a mark of quality, that a person will be hardworking. However, there is a flip side to this term. The expressive desire for perfection, which leads to negative effects such as stress, anxiety, and depression, can be related with negative qualities such as intolerance for mistakes, strict self criticism.
Yes, I agree with you. Dedicated perfectionists often find an upsides. You strive to do everything as well as possible, but in reality it turns into procrastination. You become so thorough that you give up halfway through refining an idea, or, what is even worse, you lack energy to implement this perfect plan, and eventually it goes to the graveyard of unrealized ideas. Alas, fanatism can even lead to disorders such as an anxiety, depression, or obsessive compulsive disorder. In addition, this strive for perfection often goes hand in hand with phenomena such as low self-esteem.
I think it would be interesting to hear how perfectionism has affected your career and, in general, how you might consider this phenomenon in terms of a career in IT.
Yes, indeed. When it comes to the world of software development, the issues of perfectionism become particularly acute. As a developer, I often have a desire to write such a perfect code that no one has ever seen before. And most likely no one will ever see it, because the next day, looking at the code base, I decide that it's crap and I should start all over. As a result, I might linger on a single task for eternity, or until the lead comes and gives me a gentle reminder for missing deadlines. Besides, perfect code in air quotes has a number of other problems.
This all sounds very interesting, but to be honest, I didn't understand much of it, and probably neither did those listeners who are not related to IT. Someone says that you really understand a topic if you can explain it even to a child. So let's say I am 5 years old girl. Let's do it.
It is a good point. Let me try to give you an example for a non-IT related audience. So, for instance, we have a book writer who is tasked with describing a landscape. One could do it perfectly by using a beautiful metaphor, complex subordinate sentences that span several lines, and incorporating various temporal layers, just like I did now. This hypothetical writer might find his or her text refined and sophisticated. But by the time a reader reaches the end of the paragraph, they'll forget where the sentence started. They will probably reread this sentence several times and then give up, closing the book and leaving a comment that the author is a graphomaniac and needs therapy. This example is closer to reality than you might imagine. On the other hand, a more down-to-earth description lies in shorter, concise sentences. They would be much clearer to the reader, and it's scary to think how many writings never saw the light of day because authors endlessly edited and rewrote in pursuit of perfection. In programming, things work exactly the same way. There are often cases when you need to moderate your literary genius and write perhaps a more primitive, but more understandable and easily maintainable code.
It must be a lot of trouble and a lot of energy. I've faced it myself many times. Not once have I started to write a book, but I've given up, realizing that I'll never be able to write it perfectly and be greater than Stephen King, for example. Yeah, I know, I have very high standards.
I totally get it. We've discussed examples of personal perfectionism at work. However, the situation is much broader and extends beyond an individual problem to the industry as a whole. When it comes to designing an application, there are many ways to do it. You can do it relatively quickly and cheaply, cobble it together with whatever is at hand, so to speak. There is a test to pass. Does it start and work? Well, then everything is fine. But this is a very short-sighted approach. If such an application suddenly takes off, problems will start pouring. It will be very difficult to expand this application, add new features, and debug it. That's why programmers worldwide came up with this thing called best practices. Without delving into technical details, these are additional actions that seemingly require extra time or unnecessary things to perform. A good example would be building a shed in your backyard. You can gather random planks from a dump, dig up a couple dozen rusty nails, and put together something that roughly corresponds to the idea. You can store tools there or hide some garbage out of sight. Then suddenly comes a moment when you want to store fertilizers or something that requires more demanding storage conditions. For example, to keep the temperature during winter at a certain degree, or maintaining humidity within a specific range. And at this point, it's easier to tear down this shack and build a new, this time properly. To avoid this, you should have initially designed a blueprint or a 3D model that allowed for the possibility of adding insulation in the future. But even this solution is not as straightforward. Some people overdesign, planning for a garage extension connecting to the water supply and building a helicopter pad on the roof of this shed. In other words, they think ahead about things that such a small shed in your backyard is unlikely to ever need. The same goes for software development. The best practice used at Google may and probably won't be necessary when developing a small startup. So here too, you need to temper the sense of perfectionism. I suppose there are similar examples about perfectionism related issues in your profession. Tell me about them.
Yes, as an artist, I too often struggle with perfectionism. And in my journey of becoming an artist, I have often been over critical of myself, trying to make things perfect at once. Artists often strive to create an incredible piece of art that will be perfect right away, essentially, as you described in the IT field as well. Of course, perfectionism pushes the artist to create some new attempts and techniques in drawing or any other art. If you are a perfectionist painter, you probably tend to pay a lot of attention to detail. But even here, of course, not without problems. Fear of making a mistake or ruining the work you started, the inability of create masterpiece the first time ruins all the imagination and creativity, the playfulness and the childishness with which the masterpiece must be created. Perfectionists often procrastinate because they are afraid of failing to do it perfectly. Andrew, have you ever wanted to learn to draw? And when did you give it up and why?
Yes, of course, such thoughts have occurred to me throughout my life. Since childhood, I have wanted to learn how to draw like my peers, but it didn't quite work out. Later in university, when I got a tablet with a stylus, my desire to draw woke up again. I downloaded a few video tutorials, and people fainted seeing my masterpieces, out of horror to my regret. So I decided to drop it entirely.
The strong pressure of an informed viewers, including teachers, and their demanding attitude, can lead to a person to stop practicing and trying art in general. Anyone can learn to paint, and this is my strong view. After all, I remember very well how I could not draw. It was not so long ago. I personally know a lot of people who, after graduating from art school, were afraid to take up drawing and, of course, choose another profession. Andrew, have you heard of the fear of the blank page? Not necessarily in the context of drawing, perhaps as a writer you have faced it. Maybe there is such a concept in the field of IT as well.
Yes, in the IT industry, there is also fear of a blank slate when you start a new project from scratch. However, we have support in the form of templates that generate a boilerplate code to kick off an application, alleviating the blank slate effect. However, this effect can be met under different circumstances. For instance, when I need to write someone a business letter or an essay on a certain topic, the best way to overcome this fear is to have a good understanding of the subject you are writing about. The key is to start, and your knowledge of the topic will pick up you and carry over this metaphorical obstacle. Nothing prevents you from going back to the first lines and rewriting them later. However, it is important not to rewrite the entire letter from scratch several times over.
Hmm. You know, it sounds like a great example. These are exactly the symptoms of a perfectionist. White slate fear is a psychological condition marked by feelings of anxiety when faced with a blank page or other empty space that needs to be filled. This condition is often seen in artists, but it is also found in writers, musicians, and other creative people. It can lead to procrastination, decreased productivity, and even giving up to a creativity. Andrew, how do you usually deal with it?
It seems to me that I am not fighting against it, but rather joined and surrendered to it. Joking aside, age brings one undeniable advantage: experience. I've learned to notice the moment when I'm getting sucked into the whirlpool of perfectionism and manage to break free in time.
That's a great skill. I'll keep it in mind. Personally, I really like the advice I read in Felix Scheinberger's book. He says page 17 is the best to start your sketchbook. I checked it out and it is. It's also advised in such cases to draw on the pages out of sequence. The problem of sketchbook is general is quite painful, and it became so with the coming of various social networks. Andrew, go to any social network and write there my sketchbook.
Yeah, let me try to do it. In fact, if I open Pinterest and type in this prompt,
Mhm.
uh, I find that like 99% of this content is really almost perfect. There aren't many bad pictures.
hmm That's what I'm talking about. Absolutely perfect light and composition of the photo, perfect drawing, color selection. Go to any profile of such an artist, you wouldn't see a single failed sketchbook spread. And that's probably pretty understandable. After all, we want to share the best. We want to show what we do better than anything else.
You know, it would be really amusing if you open a social media and there bakers show their cakes that didn't turn out well, or in worse, plastic surgeons display their unsuccessful works. It seems like we've fallen into the trap of perfectionism, thinking that everything around us should be perfect. However, in reality, the world is diverse. Usually, good enough is what we really see.
Yes, we forget the importance of process in the pursuit of the perfect result. I agree. We use social media as advertising and as a place to find inspiration. Yet, this is what gives confidence to artists. When I started, firstly, I would look at this sketchbook from the internet and I would get anxiety that I was going to draw and I wouldn't get it perfect. I wouldn't be able to photograph and so on. Bottom line, I just didn't take it up and paint. The other day, I came across a TikTok and, of an artist who was redoing a painting that didn't work out. And I just had a vacuum in my head. I didn't expect to see that, but I was glad this artist started sharing their failed works as well.
You could say it's the unfiltered movement in the art industry.
Right on. Then I heard an interesting idea that sketchbook is only your tool. You should keep it from other people's eyes. And in general, I try not to show it now. And you know what?
What?
I felt the power of creativity joy. The fear of making mistakes in general comes from our childhood. I don't know about others, but I was punished for bad grades, and it all gives me impression that I have be successful from the first time or everything is lost. Only over the years have I realized that mistakes are part of the journey. Success without mistakes is impossible.
I can't help but agree with you. Our entire life is a journey of mistakes and failures that we overcome to become better. Perfection may be unattainable, but it's worth a try. The key is to understand when to stop.
I think we created a lot of interesting thoughts today and gave the listeners food for thinking. Don't miss our next podcast where we will look at other hot topics from both sides, IT and drawing.
Until we meet again.
Bye bye.
Bye.